Step 1.
Taken a curved scud hook and placed a small copper bead at the front of the hook, and then attached the tying thread directly behind the bead and cover the hook shank to provide a good firm thread base.
Step 2.
I'm going to take a length of medium pearlescent mylar and bind that in place on top of the hook shank right at the rear of the thread base. And then simply pull on the mylar to eliminate trimming off any excess. And then we're going to use our scissors points to form a little loop of mylar and bind that down right at the back, creating a little mylar loop. This loop suggests the air bubble that the natural insects use on their treks around the bottom. They're air-breathing insects. They must come up to the surface all the time to replenish their air supply that they trap along their bodies and breathe much like a little scuba tank. I'm going to fold that mylar back in place because it'll be pulled over the shell back later on.
Step 3.
I'm going to take a slip of mottled turkey quill. I'm going to use the midsection. That's where the best fibers are found. About half the gape is fine on the hook. And we're going to coat this with some flexible cement to aid durability. Just a few dabs on there. And then use our thumb and forefinger to stroke that throughout the fibers of the feather.
Step 4.
We're going to take our prepared slip of turkey quill and we're going to tie it so the lighter side of the feather is facing upward, so when we pull it over we get the natural dark mottled look of the feather working to our advantage to suggest the dark back of the natural boatman. I'm going to bind that right at the base of the loop there, right at the back, and make sure it's in there good and tight.
Step 5.
I'm going to take some olive ostrich herl, trim off one fiber, and tie that in by the base of the herl, right at the base of the rear of the fly where we tied in the shellback material. Carry our tying thread forward about 3/4 to 7/8 of the way.
Step 6.
Next, we're going to use some super floss, stretch floss, to suggest the legs of the naturals. So we're just going to tie that in place, a couple of wraps, and then rotate it 90 degrees with our fingers, and then use figure of 8 wraps to bind that in place directly on top of the hook shank. A little tricky at first, but once you get the wraps established, you're off to the races.
Step 7.
Okay, to keep the legs out of the way for the time being while we form the rear of the body, we're just going to place a few wraps of thread over them just to simply secure them in a forward position. Then we take our strand of ostrich herl and wind it forward in close touching turns all the way up to the super floss legs. And when we get up to the legs, we're simply going to reverse our tying thread, release the positioning wraps, and then carry the ostrich herl forward again. Great way to keep materials in place so you control the fly. And then we're just going to tie off that ostrich herl and trim away the excess directly behind the bead.
Step 8.
Now we're going to take our turkey quill slip and pull it over the top of the fly and bind it in place directly behind the bead. Place wraps fore and aft to secure it in place, and then trim the excess. Next, we're going to take our pearl mylar that's been hanging back there and pull it directly over top of the turkey quill to once again suggest that air bubble the naturals use to breathe underwater and also provide a little added durability.
Step 9.
Take our whip finisher and place our whip finish directly behind the bead. We want to use enough wraps obviously to form the whip finish, but not enough to bulk up the fly. And then trim away the excess thread.
Step 10.
Just going to gather our legs, hold them in place gently behind the rear of the fly. Don't pull and stretch them. You want them not stubby. You want them nice and long.
We know this one works because this is the fly that caught the big trout at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, it's a very effective pattern when trout are in the shallows, feeding on immature boatmen and scuds, and I think they take it as either food source.